Welcome to Maverick Mindcast. This is part 2 with Ed Giron. We're talking about the conspiratorial aspects of the financial system, which is leading up to obviously what everyone wants to know about Bitcoin and how it could rescue us from the impending basically collapse of what's going on with our financial systems globally. Welcome back, Ed. Thanks for joining us again.
Hey, Corinne, thanks for having me back on.
Super of course. We want to have you back on more often, obviously, but very glad that we can kind of start to get into the meat of more stuff. You did a lot of coverage of history and how we got to almost where we are today. So curious I know you want to talk about deregulation, things like that, and let me stop talking and I'll just give it over to you.
Yeah, so one thing I'll tell the audience first is I know it's preface, this conversation's preference around Bitcoin. But one thing I will say is the key to understanding why you need Bitcoin is to understand the key elements of the financial system, manipulation of the financial system. Because if you don't understand that stuff, you're not going to understand Bitcoin. You're not going to understand, when things happen in the Bitcoin market, when the dollar price of it goes up and down. It's going to be very difficult to grasp what's going on and why you need to not pay attention to that stuff when the real problem comes from what they call TradFi, traditional financial system. So I'm going to go over a few things. I try my best not to make it drag out too long. I know the first episode, went well over an hour with history, but
which is great. You've done all the work and now you're sharing it with everybody else.
Yeah, because part of my journey, when I started my journey to understand Bitcoin and crypto, I came from, understanding the financial system was broken. So once I found Bitcoin, I knew why. I didn't look at it as it's, it's just another. I guess I did look at it like a speculation, but I knew I needed to focus outside the system because the system's broken. So if I don't go into why the system's broken through manipulation, you're not going to understand why you need Bitcoin. You're going to look at it. I don't understand that. I don't need it. I'm safe in my stocks, bonds, and real estate. So I think it's vital to understand that stuff first. And I'll do my best to get through it, simply and quickly. And then we'll get to, questions you have around, Bitcoin or, crypto digital assets in general.
Okay, cool.
All right. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. So I think last time we ended around the 1980s, which was when Ronald Reagan set upon deregulation, which all that really means is they took away a lot of the rules that constrained Wall Street and the investment banks. And basically, once those rules got taken away, it gave free for all to the financial industry to create all these synthetic financial instruments that end up just creating a massive casino that is Wall Street today. You're taking, now you had people's money, hard-earned money, in just absolute degenerate, gambling machine. So that was the 1980s. Basically, once we got, I figure we'll start at 1987. Okay, so 1987 was Black Monday. That was the first. That was one of the biggest single day crashes in stock market history. Why did that matter? Because once deregulation got taken away, started being pulled back in the early 80s, that started fueling the bubble. Okay, again, we talked about how they flood the system with credit, things like, or manipulate interest rates. Once they started to pull back deregulation, this just opened the avenue for rampant speculation, which is what creates bubbles in markets, and
now what's actually a bubble? What do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean, but
so when I say bubble is
you're saying the housing market crash of 2000.
Well, it could be a bubble, could be in any asset class, but for this, we're talking about, I guess, equities or the stock market, which all that means is when you're flooding credit, in the system. So you have all these firms taking out loans and creating all these financial instruments and using leverage to gamble and bet on different things. It could be options contracts, futures contracts, which are just they sound complicated. It's literally two parties taking the bet on the price of an asset in either direction. One party wins, one party, loses. not to complicate things, but what creates the bubble is you have also at the same time is, corporations, they get easy credit, they start, getting into debt. We talked about that on like the first episode. So that's all it means is basically when you put easy money out, human nature is you don't treat that money. You got it easy, so you're less likely to protect it. You make more reckless decisions with it, I guess is the simple way to put it. So Wall Street and that industry in general was constrained to a lot of rules. And me and you've talked about we don't like state intervention. We're free market capitalists, but to some extent it did make sense because again, taking these things away are what fuel the bubbles. And we talked about the manipulation in the first episode. They manipulate policy through politicians to pull that back because they know they want to create these booms and busts. So to create the booms, they need free for all in the markets. How do they get free for all? String pulling above, via politicians to implement these policies that take away the rules. Once the rules are taken out, human nature, they understand human psyche, they're going to go wild because it's
gangbuster.
We're just humans, it's all once you know that how to manipulate and get outcomes, like we talked about that book, they understand energetic systems, they understand humans. You introduce certain inputs to get a certain output. They know how to manipulate to get humans to do things that they know they're going to do via human nature. Easy money, human 100%. Nature, reckless strategies and things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Wolf of Wall Street, because I'm sure a lot of people have seen that movie.
Well, that's around the time.
The more he got away with, he didn't stop himself. He actually went full force, until you hit the wall.
And that's I'm glad you brought that movie up. That's prime example. Once you start pulling back like the rules that constrain this industry, that's the stuff that pop you get. And then he was ripping off people with money. They're gambling all their money because there's easy credit in the system. So it's like it just perpetuates this giant disaster, which is what they need. They need to build the disaster, so when they pull the money out, in comes the boom. And that's what we're going to get to. That's what is going to take us into today, because I have all these notes here, but I want to make sure we get to Bitcoin, because I'll show the audience I write a lot of stuff because again, it's vital to understand this stuff, but I won't drag it out too much. So let's dive right into it. So we had deregulation in the 1980s. 1987 first, big market crash, and that would come to introduce something known as, the Fed put. So I don't want to get too complicated. I'm sure you've heard about this through, the rebel capitalists and things like that. But all that really means is, a put is an option strategy. When you have to get into that, it's just think downside protection. So if something bad happens, it's like insurance. The Fed put it's just basically a metaphor for when anything goes wrong in a market, our central bank, again, manipulated, controlled through outside entities, they're there to backstop the carnage, because again, when you have all this reckless spending, a market should crash and wash out all the malinvestment and waste. That's the natural ecosystem of a free market. But the problem is, every time there's been a big market correction, the central bank comes to the rescue by again either lowering interest rates, flooding the system with credit. So now we've been accustomed to there always being, I guess, like that safety net under the market. So now we have 40 years. So figure more than we have basically 4 decades, because it's even before 87. It's really starting since they took the dollar off the gold standard, which we talked about in the first episode. So over 50 years, we basically have a fake market. So if you're 50 or younger, you actually don't know any semblance of a real market, and that's the main problem today. Is we're built off this recency bias that we look back. If you're in your, let's say, 50s, 40s, 30s, late 20s, you only know your lifetime, like it seemed pretty status quo. You saw your parents, they the boomers, they work, maybe they're retirement now, they have their pension, or their 401k, and they're doing okay. What they don't understand is that's all been manipulated via central bank intervention. There's always been a safety net there. So we're going to go into some quick statistics of before we even get into the Fed put. So let's just start with the US. We talk about how central banks enslave governments. So I don't think I really explained what that means. So I want to just give a quick overview of how they do that. So our government, or our country, was sold to the Federal Reserve in 1913. We talked about that.
Yeah.
So what that means is basically the US government issues treasuries. They need to raise money for entitlements and things like that. So they'll issue treasury bonds. They'll issue debt. They issue that into the markets, and what's known as primary dealers. So these are like the bank intermediaries. They come and buy all those treasuries from government, because the government can't sell it to the Federal Reserve directly. So once the primary dealers come and buy up all that treasury, then they go and sell it to the Federal Reserve. And here's the key. The Federal Reserve now buys up all those treasuries with printed digits on it. They print money into existence. They don't have an account at the Fed with, physical paper banknotes or any. They just conjure up, let's say $1 billion in bonds, type in $1 billion, and they buy the bonds. Now that comes in the form of bank reserves, and it goes on the asset side of the balance sheet of these primary dealers. And here's the key. They can now the banks, so think JP Morgan, Bank of America, now they have bank reserves, fake Fed money, that they can lend into existence in the real market. So that's how money gets created. It's not to say the Fed prints money and that gets into the economy. I know you've heard Jeff Snyder talk.
Yeah.
He's a Mac for you. If you don't know who he is, he's an expert on internal financial system plumbing. These banks now have the ability to create they now create money into existence by loaning Fed reserves, which are inherently created out of nothing. So why does that matter? Because you, the American citizen, are responsible for paying back that original debt issuance that the Treasury issued, right? So every time government issues debt, that's, they have to spend. It's not like we have this inherent thought like, oh, government has money. Government does not have one penny of their own. Every cent that the United States government has is taxpayer money. Every cent. The US government does not have 1 cent that is government money. Everything comes off the backs of us, the US citizens.
Yeah. Basically, they've never produced anything in their lives.
They don't.
They just spend, we produce, they spend.
Exactly. So it's,
Sounds
we're
like
the
a
producers.
crap deal to me.
So, well, that's why, because now all right, so government can spend whatever they want. We have no say in that. And now we are responsible for paying back.
But we're a democracy.
Exactly. If you get people, if you capture their minds young enough and dumb them down enough, then they'll vote themselves into enslavement and reckless policy every time, which is what we're seeing today. Here's the key. We talked about in the first episode, they create credit out of thin air, but they don't create the interest you're responsible to pay when you take out a loan. So now we have all these, the government issued debt, let's say $1 billion. Now the US citizen is responsible for paying back that $1 billion plus interest. So episode 1, we covered the principal $1 billion is created. The interest is not. All of us as a collective US citizen are running around, whatever it is you do for work or produce in the marketplace, you're responsible now for paying back the government's $1 billion plus interest. But they never create the interest. So that means there's more money. There's never enough money in circulation to pay the debt. It's a scam. That's why the value of the dollar since 1913 has basically lost 95% of its purchasing power. It just gets weaker and weaker. You notice there was actually an article. They were doing, I guess, a renovation on an old house from like it was a historical house, and they had found someone who lived there. They had hid $2,000 in paper notes, like somewhere tucked away in the house, and they found it was actually pretty well preserved. So they had the $2,000, they did the math on factor in inflation. That $2,000 back then buys what $40,000 buys today. But in your hand, you're holding $2,000 in paper notes. So in reality, you still have $2,000. But back then, that $2,000 buys $40,000 worth of goods and services.
Wow, that's a
So
huge
think
fall there.
think about this: as if you're an American citizen and you're working, you have no investable assets really. You're working and saving dollars. That's what happens when you save dollars. They lose value because there's constant influx of credit into the system or money supply expansion that dilutes you. So you have three, I guess, tranches of, you have your poor, well, for simplicity, poor, middle class, and rich, right? And I'll define poor, and this is not to disrespect or degrade anyone, but what it really means is you essentially work for dollars and you have no investable assets. These are people who have, I guess, service level jobs, restaurants, jobs where you're not going to get benefits or a 401k or anything like that. You're simply working for a check and maybe tips. You're working for dollars and you're not investing that money. Those are the people getting absolutely crushed with what's going on right now, because now we have, 2020, they completely went in overdrive with the money supply expansion. So I'm going to bring it back and then we'll get into that because I'm kind of rambling. All right. So we understand how central banks enslave governments. I use the example. So we get that. Any questions on that? Pretty.
No, I mean, I guess the Fed gets their money from the government.
No. The Fed creates money out of nothing. The Fed literally creates, government gets their ability to spend from the Fed essentially, but it's mostly the Fed now because technically it's really supposed to be U.S. citizens buying U.S. bonds because they're backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, which is a joke at this point. But essentially, when government issues debt, citizens can buy, or pension funds, or even foreign governments technically buy the debt, but the problem today is less and less people are buying government debt because they see what they're doing to the money. It's like, why would you want to hold let's say $100,000 bond that they're paying you a pittance on for 10, 20, 30 years? It's a losing. I mean, obviously there's way too much money still in the debt market. So I guess a lot of people don't understand that. But the reality is now most of our funding, the debt machine because the government needs to continue spending, comes from the Fed. So to make some semblance of a functioning system, but it's just an absolute scam, there's a middleman, the primary dealer banks. Government issues debt, whatever it is they need to spend, they issue the debt, the banks buy it up for show basically, and then they sell it to the Federal Reserve, who buys it with magic internet money. That's the key. So it's it looks official, but that's a secret. It's like the Fed buys it from the middlemen, primary dealer banks, and then they use the Fed's fake money as bank reserves on the asset side of their balance sheet. And now they can go and make loans in the real economy with that as their collateral, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The fake money created from nothing, they lend from that. That's the fractional reserve. They have Fed reserves on their balance sheet. So, we have simplicity, $1 million in Fed reserves. So we're going to now lend out 10 million from that 1 million. It's an insane scam. They literally conjure up, and we're the ones who take those loans in the form of mortgages, auto loans, whatever it is, student loans. We're the ones who end up taking that when they didn't do any work to be able to give those loans. That's the scam. Banks loan money that they didn't work to get. It's a scam. We have to go and work a real job, manual labor, teaching, whatever it is you have to do in the market. You have to really work to now pay off a loan from something that they didn't do anything of value to really. It's like if I could pretend I could lend to people I know $1 million here. I loan it to you guys, have to pay me back, but I just conjured it up. Who would do that? No one. That's the system we're in. And when we're working harder and harder for a currency devaluing, exponentially.
The debt is the lifeblood of the economy. I mean, the economy
Exactly.
can't function without debt.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a giant Ponzi. It's a
Yeah.
debt scam. And that's why most people feel like they're in a rat race. Like no matter what they do, they take on another job, whatever it is, it's never enough because we have to keep continuing to get into debt, expanding the money supply, more money in circulation. So it's like people don't inherently know this, so they don't understand like the why. So a few like statistics of where the United States is today. So because we're constantly taking on this debt, the U.S. is actually a twin deficit nation. It's got fiscal deficit and current account deficit, which is just fancy words for fiscal. We spend more money than, no, I'm sorry, we take on more debt than we take in revenue. Very, fiscally, get these big words. Very simple. We take on more debt than we bring in production, and then current account deficit just means we import more from the rest of the world because we're now a consumer nation, not a producer nation. We import more from the rest of the world than we export in goods and services because we sent off or manufacturing or infrastructure for manufacturing. We shipped it off to to China and other parts of the world. That was also by design to create a codependence, different rabbit hole. So we're a twin deficit nation. So that basically means we are at 130% debt to GDP, which simply means at 100% debt to GDP means, for simplicity, you can compare it to a household. This is as a nation. Household brings in $100,000. They spend $100,000. And so you're max, you're
Like
even.
a wash. Yeah.
It's a wash. We're at 130% debt to GDP. And there was a firm called Hirschman Capital that did a study, and they did a study on 51 nations that reached 130% GDP or, empires in the past or whatever. Every single one failed, with the exception of Japan, which is failing today because Japan has a few anomalies as an island nation, and their debt is in their own currency. So they've been able to kind of push off their day of reckoning, which is happening now. If you've been listening to, I'm sure you've been listening to, Gammon and those, the macro guys talking about Japan's imploding now. Their currency absolutely getting decimated. So their day of reckoning is coming now. But the United States has now reached 130% debt to GDP. So we're at that point where like there's no going back. It's like this is end game, and the key to understand, this was by design from the people who control the money. So it's we're at we have 70% of tax receipts. So everything, 70% of all the revenue the government gets in taxes goes to entitlements. We talked about the first episode, the seeds for entitlements: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They sound great on the outside, have compassion, have a heart, we should fund, this and that. But the problem is we just continue to take on so much debt that now we're at the point where anything we bring in just goes to pay off entitlements. So we're not even creating any value as a nation anymore. We're beyond in decline, right? So that's the state of the U.S. economy, is debt to GDP. A prominent credit guy named Greg Foss in the Bitcoin space. A lot of these traditional finance guys, they start to see the light and they end up going to Bitcoin because we're going to get to Bitcoin, I promise. Mm-hmm. But he put out a really good thread on Twitter. Another gentleman named James Lavish, former hedge fund manager, also left traditional finance once he saw the scam, and now he's devoted to Bitcoin. They actually went and did some really good numbers on the state of like the U.S. finances. So our tax revenue right now is $4 trillion. Oh
my God.
$4 trillion we bring in tax revenue. Now, subtract from that 4 trillion, 2.8 trillion in entitlements, again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, all that stuff. So that's 2.8 trillion subtracted from that. Defense, we're spending 800 billion on defense, and then that leaves $400 billion. But here's the kicker: that's the cost to service the debt. So the debt that the United States owes to the money masters, that's $400 billion. So whatever's left over is literally going. So think about a household let's say you bring in $100,000 and your expenses are, 130,000. Every time you now have to serve, so you're at a wash at 100, that extra 30 grand, now you're finding new credit cards, which is just to simplify it so you the audience understand. That's where we are right now. We are basically taking on credit cards, and what happens with a credit card? You are responsible for a percentage rate that you have to pay. So we're at $400 billion, and that's the cost just to service the debt. And here's the kicker. Again, we are at historic low interest rates. So that 400 billion right now is at historically rock bottom interest rates, which we just started to like raise a little bit, and it's causing havoc, and it's eventually going to bring everything down. But if the United States was a corporation, that scenario right there, that's a 1 times interest coverage ratio, which simply means that's if you put a rate, if the US was a corporation, that's triple C, which if you don't understand bond ratings, that's junk. So our nation, we have junk. If we were a corporation, it would be junk rated, because we're any surplus that's left from our production goes just to pay the interest on the debt we're in. Now here's the problem. We're raising rates right now. So our national debt's $30 trillion. So let's say we're at 3.2% interest rates. That now brings our annual debt service to $1 trillion. That's 600 billion more than the 400 billion that was going to service the debt. That's 1 trillion. So for your audience and whoever's listening to understand what $1 trillion in just debt service, 1 million seconds was about 11 days ago. 1 billion seconds was 32 years ago. 1 trillion seconds was 32,000 years ago. So if we were, let's say, had the capability to bring in $1 every second, picture $1 every second, it would take us 32,000 years to pay off $1 trillion. And we are $30 trillion in national debt. And here's the beyond depressing kicker. There's 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Social Security is going to be bankrupt by 2035. It's math. All of this is mathematics. You understand what I'm saying? Like, this is why people I need to make this stuff evident, because you're not going to understand Bitcoin if you don't understand the dire situation. And again, it has nothing to do with you as we didn't do any of this. The absolute traitors in government, parasites, manipulators sold our country off. Mm-hmm. They are responsible. We're born here. We have freedom engraved in our mind, but we're not taught this stuff in school. We're not taught any of this. So they're going out and destroying this country. We're just doing what we're supposed to do, being productive members of society, getting a job while our currency gets destroyed. They're going out and absolutely decimate, and I'm sorry to the people listening, but the Democratic Party was absolutely chosen for this purpose. And I'm not going to give.
I think at one time there were a little more integrity to the Democratic Party, but
yeah, they swapped.
Not anymore.
Both parties are ultimately, and that's what the audience needs to understand, is both parties
are the same side. They're two sides of the same coin.
You have some Republican voices that say things that absolutely make sense, but I'm still waiting. And there's only one who's ever come out and said anything against this absolute effing disaster scam that we're in, is Ron Paul. No one in the Republican side ever talks about ending the Federal Reserve or giving Congress the ability to abolish the Federal Reserve and just issue interest-free money. Congress has the power to issue interest-free currency, which would mean we wouldn't all be on a hamster wheel working exponentially harder for a currency devaluing exponentially, because interest is the kicker. Interest that isn't created. So if you issue interest-free money, it just goes into the whoever's most productive, whoever's most creative. You obviously, your labor gets more of the capital, but it circulates better than if there isn't enough in the system to pay off all the debt.
Now, so, Abraham Lincoln wanted to do that, right?
And I'm glad because I actually had a side note about it. I didn't talk about Abraham.
And then
Lincoln.
He went to see a movie.
He issued. Well, that's the thing. Lincoln issued interest-free greenbacks. I don't know if you've heard the term greenback. Abraham Lincoln issued interest-free currency, which is the absolute best thing you can do for your citizens, interest-free currency. And we all know what happened to Lincoln. He got an intervention to the back of the head. And here's the kicker: John Wilkes Booth, allegedly agent of the Rothschilds. And that's documented for the audience. I just want to say a lot of this stuff we're talking about comes from a man named David Icke. Me and Corinne, we pretty much owe our awakening to this man. His work has changed our lives. You gotta understand, it takes work to do this. So if you're watching this on video, you need to understand we're not just making this stuff up. Like these are 900-page books, 700-page books, tabbed, highlighted. You know, most people
annotated,
like. Yeah. A lot, and he's the one who opened my eyes to the financial side, because most of the information.
And he's not even a finance guy. He's just
not
a very good researcher.
He opened my eyes in finance more than anyone I've ever heard in, the traditional or even alternative finance space. None of these guys come close to David. So I want the audience to know a lot of what we're talking about is derived from the work of David Icke. So that's very important because we have to give him credit. This man.
Yeah. And I was almost going to introduce, I will now, but I want to get to Bitcoin, but it's kind of like, it sounds like the spider is the Fed, and then the pyramid is
it's even
the primaries and the banking system that, they kind of dictate the orders, and then it just trickles down into this mess and down to the regular average person.
Because the thing is, and another thing I didn't mention in the first episode was that 1944 Great Reset, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where the dollar became gold reserve standard. Out of that came the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Those two are so when we talked about the third enslavement in the third world,
it was unelected people that are making decisions about our lives, like Klaus Schwab.
They answered and that's so a lot of people actually, and I'm sorry, they listened to our first interview and they would ask me, who is this? Like, what do you mean when you say cult? It's basically just a network of secret societies, bureaucrats, and all these creatures in governments and all these 3-letter
parasites
organizations that work together in coordination to bring in all these policies. Their ultimate end game is one world government, one world money, one world tax. They want a global fascist dictatorship, planet Earth under control of a handful of people you could put in one room. It sounds crazy. It's 100% real. I showed you the books. I've absolutely done the research. It's not conspiracy. Like, this is fact. If you open your eyes and you start doing the work, you find out this is it. Like, there's no speculation here. Like, and this is what I wish a lot of people in the traditional finance space would understand. It's like they're operating from a framework. They don't understand that all of this is being coordinated from above. So I gave you, the example of like the absolute shit situation that the United States is, not to the fault of the people, but again, policymakers who are owned and controlled. So once you get historically, and another book I'll show is Ray Dalio. I mean, we're not, the biggest fans of Ray Dalio, but he's a very good researcher on economic history of empires from a non-alternative, from a very traditional finance framework. So this is his book, and Changing of the World Order. Why does that matter? In that book, basically outlines, once you get to this point of 130% debt to GDP, divided nation, all this stuff that's been absolutely engineered to pull the United States apart, you as a country, the government has two options. You basically, once you're at these levels of debt, there's no way out. It's either inflate the currency into oblivion to pay back all this debt in devalued currency, which would absolutely decimate all American citizens, because they have to pay back. They want to pay back. It's like Corinne lends Ed $1,000, and I get to pay Corinne back, 10 years from now, $1,000. Well, that $1,000 buys today, is it going to buy the same amount of goods and services 10 years from now? No. So that's what people need to understand. Or option 2 is hard default. The U.S. government comes out tomorrow and says, we mathematically cannot pay back this debt. We are openly defaulting to all our creditors. So that's bondholders. We can't pay it back. What are the odds that no government has ever chosen that path, by the way?
None? Wow.
So that's the point of why I showed the book. Every government or failed empire in history has inflated the currency into oblivion. And this goes back to even ancient times. Like that's how Rome fell. They had silver denarius coins. They started, using base metals and copper and not using pure silver. Eventually, Roman soldiers started to catch on to this. They were being paid in these fake copper coins, and they started walking off because that's currency only has the value that you give it. And once Roman soldiers they wanted to be paid in real gold, real silver. They're getting these fake, government coins, T-based,
risking their lives and
exactly, risking
their
lives,
their part,
getting fake money, and they started walking off. And that's when you had the Germanic tribes start invading Rome, and you know how that went. So that's where we're at right now. It's either hyperinflation or a deflation, and a lot of people will push back and it's like, oh, they would never let that happen. I'm like, are you kidding me? Did we not see what these people did over the last 2.5 years? For anyone to say that would never happen, like that's the one that everyone said, oh, that only happens in banana republics. I don't know if you've been paying attention to everything going on lately. We absolutely look like a banana republic. Yeah. So this is inevitable. Like this is it's mathematics. Like I gave the numbers examples. It's just simply math. There's no escaping this. The only question that no one knows is how long and how it all plays out. But we know that there's string pullers who want, and that's where the alternative investigating comes into play. It's like you have to figure, when you know the alternative, the truth, I guess, about manipulation. It's like if they want to introduce CBDC, central bank digital currencies, surveillance coins, and get paper money out of circulation, they are engineering the biggest, I guess, crash or collapse in world history. Or I guess we're at the end of a 100-year credit cycle, to term traditional finance. So that would have been the Great Depression. Think about it, 1929. That was roughly close to 100 years ago. That's 100-year. That's what Ray Dalio's book is about, 100-year credit cycles. But when you step above to the alternative, when you know it's manipulation, we're at the end of a 100-year credit cycle where they're getting ready for the next great reset, which is they want to destroy the dollar. That's what we're seeing right now with what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan. To give an example to the audience right now, we're sanctioning Russia's ruble, but Russia's true power comes from their commodities, their oil, their energy. So we're out there attacking their currency, but at the same time, now all Western Europe relies on their oil. So we're sanctioning them. We're taking their foreign exchange reserves and blocking them from getting it, which absolutely, if you understand that as a government, you had to protect the value of the dollar, the importance and relevance of what backs the dollar, our government just threw it out the window. They might as well have shot the dollar in the head February 24th when we blocked Russia's
before my birthday.
Oh wow! Well, now you can say
that's not
your
good.
next birthday. That was the last. That's when they shot the dollar in the head, because once they blocked Russia's foreign exchange reserves, that took away all semblance of validity for nations to hold dollars as reserves. Because anything you do that goes against whatever the mind hive in Washington wants, which is controlled from above, they can just block your money. So now that, everything our government is doing, it's like when you know how to connect the dots, everything they're doing is literally unraveling everything we've known.
Yeah.
And again, it's so hard for people to understand this because you go out, it doesn't seem like anything is wrong. Like you go out, you're about your everyday life. But when you can see, when you learn to understand headlines and articles and things like that, you can connect it. Like I know how to, this is why I can see all these things that 99% of people around me they have no idea. I try to explain, but everything just seems fine because it's built off that recency bias of, oh, well, the last 40 years, 50 years, my parents, they worked a job and, they put their money in the stock market and now they're retired and they're fine and they bought a house. Well, like how many, how many millennials today can buy a house? You have 5.5 million under, people that can't buy a home. 5.5 million shortage in housing, which is derived from the engineered bubble of 2007 and 2008, mortgage crisis and great financial crisis. So all this stuff is by design. We have two options, and then it's basically, my bet is that they're going to hyperinflate. But it's not to say that this happens like tomorrow. This is gradual. But I want to say within the next couple of years, like, we're going to see some, again, this could happen at any time, but in reality, I would say we're going to see some major changes, because they're really pushing for this. They gave us dollar reserve currency status. Now they're taking it away to bring in the next. David Icke talks about they want China to be the next superpower, because China was the blueprint that they want for the rest of the world. He always says, if you want to see what's planned for the West tomorrow, see China today. Surveillance state, communism, that's what they want for the whole planet. And that's why a lot of the things we're seeing going on in America today emulate China. And a lot of our pathetic politician traders are so fond of China. It's all connected. Like, once you start to understand this stuff, it all starts to make sense. So to get to the last point of this, and we can start getting into Bitcoin, and the man we've talked about off the record, Michael Saylor, because you've heard of him a lot. I guess I don't know where you've come across Saylor, probably in like the mainstream stuff. I've listened to pretty much every in-depth interview Michael Saylor has done. I've studied their Bitcoin strategy, like through their debt issuance to take on and buy Bitcoin. I've taken note. I've probably listened to hundreds of hours at this point of Saylor. He's one of the only guys in corporate traditional finance who understands it, and that's why a lot of mainstream media, they don't understand it. But when you listen, again, I've done the work to understand where Saylor's coming from. He has the best analogies. He gets it, and I'm going to give the examples he gives, because it's for people to understand why a multi-millionaire, or at one point billionaire CEO, would put his company at risk, his own personal net worth at risk, which I don't think it's risk, but to go all in on Bitcoin. It's not about getting rich. It's not about whatever the pathetic mainstream media paints it as, because they are enemies of Bitcoin for the most part. You have to understand that this man did the work, the same work. He's not going to come out. He's a CEO of a public company. He's not going to come out and start saying, there's a cult manipulating the planet. Like, he can't. Okay. He has to keep it mainstream media friendly. He's a public figure. He has to be. I mean, I don't know if he knows how deep it goes or whatever, but what I do know is he understands the abysmal state of the economic situation of the United States.
Yeah.
So Michael Saylor puts it this way: the entire world's sitting on a crumbling balance sheet of cash and credit, which means everywhere from the highest, billionaires, corporations, down to minimum wage job worker, whatever your situation is, you are on a melting ice cube. Whether that's the stack of money you have saved under your bed, that's your life savings, or your multi-billion dollars in whatever, assets you have. Or if you're the average middle-class working person with a couple $100,000 in a 401k or 403b, whatever it is, you are on a melting ice cube, because all of those were what he calls currency derivatives: stocks, bonds, real estate, currency derivatives. Why? Because they all derive their value from the dollar. And what did we just talk about? They're destroying the dollar. Yeah. So most people think like, oh, we're America. Nothing's ever going to happen. We were sold back in 1913. We don't control what happens to America. And that's the key that people need to understand is we do not control what the government's going to do, because our government is only controlled. Again, separate the good voices out there saying rational things. DeSantis, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a lot of good voices. Even Tulsi Gabbard, when she was in Democrat, they're saying the right things. These select handful of people ultimately cannot change the course of what they're going to do, because let's say government's made up of a few thousand people, a select few here and there, people that really care and really want to make a difference. Because I can't say that all government is bad. There are people who want to make a change, but ultimately the only change can come is from us, the citizens. That's why this information is vital, right? So you have you have, we're all sitting on a
You know
melting
that.
ice.
Okay. So where's Bitcoin come in?
All right.
I know
So
this.
all right, that's the point. You're either in stocks, bonds, or real estate.
Yeah.
And that's where Bitcoin comes in, right? Because you have to understand, if let's say stocks are valued on the value of their discounted cash flow, most people don't understand why they hold the stock. They hold the stock for what future cash flows are going to bring in, the future value of that money. Well, if you know the dollar's being destroyed, the value, the currency's devaluing exponentially, and you hold shares in all these corporations or whatever that are bringing cash. It's like, think about holding stocks in Venezuela. Venezuela hyperinflated. Fun fact, Venezuela's stock market was the best performing stock market in world history. Why? Because they went into beyond, insane hyperinflation. That's what's happening right now. I'm not saying we're going to be like Venezuela, but what I'm saying is we have this notion that the market goes up, and that goes back to 1987, where we talked about the Fed put. 1987, Black Monday, the year 2000. I don't know if you remember back then. It was the tech bubble around 2000, 2001. Massive tech bubble. All these internet.com companies that weren't going to do anything. Massive bubble. Fed put again. They, massive crash. Fed comes to the rescue. Slash rates. Blah blah blah. And we get to 2008. Engineered mortgage crisis. Again, policy giving ninja loans, no income, no job to anyone to buy a house when they can't buy it. Create a massive bubble, collapse, Fed put, all the same song and dance every time. Then so that's 2008. The next one comes 2020, and that's today. We're on alternative media. I'm going to say it. Absolute pandemic, right? So they needed to crash. They needed a massive crash to justify printing $7 trillion. What took over 200 years for the United States government to get to that level. It took from the inception of our nation over 200 years to get to, $7 trillion. And in 2 years, they printed $7 trillion.
No.
What if you have a government that cares about their people, cares about being the superpower again?
Well, they wouldn't even shut anything down.
Exactly. The lockdowns was by design because you had to destroy the supply chains, you had to destroy the small businesses. Again, you have to be blind, which is what they've designed most people to be, to understand that this was all completely engineered and coordinated. We can even do a full episode on, the virus aspect of it, but we won't even go there. You have 2020, they created $7 trillion, right? So you're not going to win in the stock market going forward. Okay. I mean, you can always find opportunities here and there, but when you're sitting on a melting ice cube of currency derivatives, bonds, again, even worse, you're going to take on government debt knowing that we can't pay back, it mathematically can't pay back the debt that we're in right now. You're not going to keep taking, and this is what is going to crush fixed income people, because they worked their whole life, they saved their nest egg and whatever. Now they need to put it in safe assets. So that's when you have, pensions and all this holding government debt. You're basically taking your life savings, leaving it in the backyard and coming in and just burning a chunk of it every day. Mm-hmm. So that's bonds. And you have real estate. Real estate was something that I really looked into, super important, because it has all the perfect, I guess, capabilities to take advantage of the fiat system, which is, I know we're trying to rush this, but I had all this stuff here, but we'll just get through it. They're coming after real estate too, because when you have a government indebted, they get desperate. So all the things that ran free over the last 40 years, being able to write off the depreciation of a house or investment property, even though the value's gone up, that's technically not fair, right? Because the house depreciates, but if the value goes up because they've printed an insane amount of money, that's kind of cheating. But that's why real estate was great. Had great tax loopholes, and they're going to come after all that. And again, I could have gone way more in depth in each one of these, but because we want to get to Bitcoin, You know, I want to respect the time, you know, the time of the audience. So we'll just leave it at that. I have a ton more that really goes into depth into each one of these. I hope you guys can formulate a framework of the situation. Again, if we can, if there's demand for it, we can come back and do another episode and go into depth, because I can absolutely decimate stocks, bonds, and real. I have insane examples that people need. Like,
we get it. I mean, it's built on, I mean, just for the sake of getting to Bitcoin, we understand, because
yeah. All right. So let's get to Bitcoin.
How is Bitcoin going to solve or prevent? I want to know, how would Bitcoin prevent these kinds of unscrupulous things from happening?
So Bitcoin's a new asset class. Let's put it this way. It's a digital monetary network, which simply means it's a network, a way to transfer value from person to person without, because we're going to keep it super simple, because a lot of the again, on my journey of Bitcoin is I've clawed and nailed to, it's a lot of this in-depth stuff is pretty complicated to understand. But what I want the average, the person listening right now to understand is, you do not need to understand I mean, it's great. I listen, I'm obsessed with learning. I go and devout and I don't stop, right? I love learning, but you don't need to know all the crazy, intricate details of Bitcoin. So let's give the first example of why. First example, right? Yeah. Bitcoin, for simplicity, was made with all the inherent value that gold has. So we talked in the first episode of the importance of gold. It took work to produce. It had all the what do you call it? It had everything that represents hard money, right?
Yep.
Portability. So, you know, you could put a gold, I mean, it's not the best portability, but you could carry gold bars with you and bring them. They're portable, right? Durable. Gold has lasted thousands of years. Divisibility. You can melt the gold bar into gold coins. Unit of account, you know, it's able to be used in transactions, counted. And what was it? Divisibility, durability, fungibility. An ounce of gold in your pocket, an ounce of gold in my pocket. If we swap the ounce of gold, it's still an ounce of gold. Fungibility. Bitcoin creates all of this now in the digital world. So we're heading from analog to digital because we are so ingrained. And again, we talked about this in the first episode. The cult wants us to have this concept that money needs to be tangible. It has to be hard or physical in a sense for it to be money, when this entire system is based off thin air. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We think we grab a stack of hundreds, it's there, it's money, it's real, right? Or I grab my credit card and I swipe it, there's something there. But in the background, this entire system is based off of fake digits on a screen. There is no real money. That's the scam, right? So let's scrap the idea that now Bitcoin needs intrinsic value. This is something that Peter Schiff, listen, I love Peter's work. I listen to him a lot. If you don't know who Peter Schiff is, you know, a prominent voice in the Austrian economic macro space, but vehemently against Bitcoin, because he thinks that there's a need for money to have tangibility. When in reality, again, our system is made up of nothing. Fugazi, like Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan says in the movie. It's all fake, you know. So here's the difference: banks create money from doing no work. Okay, they type, you know, we went through that. They create money from nothing. Yeah. To create Bitcoin, it takes actual work. Okay, so Bitcoin's, it's broken up into two. All right, so this is where it starts to get, you know, complicated. But let's. I don't know if you have any questions before. Maybe I try to explain.
No, just explain what Bitcoin is. That's
okay. Good. So you have Bitcoin, the protocol. All protocol means is a set of rules. It's software. That's it. It's that simple. Bitcoin is software. The same way, you know, I guess Windows is software. Bitcoin is software. It's a monetary protocol, a set of rules in which party A can transfer value, because value is what we give it. If we believe Bitcoin has value, it's valuable. We can transfer value from counterparty A to counterparty B with no middleman. This system right now, how do we transfer value? through banks.
Mm.
All of a sudden, we're heading into times where it's freedom of speech, but watch what you say.
Yeah.
That's the key to digital, central bank digital. That's why that's the next step, because they want to control every cent, digital cent that you spend. And they want to make sure your carbon score credit is, they want to monitor, making sure you're not boiling the oceans for being human. That's the key for. So now we're at a point in history where it's going to be, Bitcoin, either Bitcoin wins or at least in conjunction with, because they're probably gonna, I hate to say it, they're probably gonna get their system in, but it is vital that Bitcoin is right there alongside as the opt out or as your ability to operate out. Because if they have you all in their system, we're China, but times a million. Like, if you think China's bad now, the world these people want to bring in, because you've heard, right? You've done the work with, David's work. So Bitcoin, it's a protocol.
So how are they not involved with Bitcoin though?
Okay, so
who's running Bitcoin?
Yeah, okay, so let's do that. Biggest misconception is that Bitcoin just came into existence in 2008. The story goes, a pseudonymous creator name under the alias Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, right? What
It
people
sounds
don't
very QAnon to me.
Yeah, okay, so let's break that down. All Satoshi, whoever this, we don't know if it's a he, she, they. I mean, he referred to himself as a he in various emails, but what whoever it is did, he came up with the Bitcoin white papers, which is 9 pages of just basically explaining the computer science behind Bitcoin. But what people don't understand is that didn't just come to be like overnight. He created that white paper off of 40 years of previous failed attempts at anti-state money and other versions of cryptographic money. So Bitcoin really, in essence, came to be in, let's say, cryptography, which is just for simplicity, taking one message and hiding what the message says for it to come out on the other end as the message you wanted. Think about when you type a password in and you see all the little, asterisks. That's encryption. Word to hidden to back to word, just for simplicity for the audience, right? Cryptography started coming into place in the 1970s. Then people started, there's a community name that, they're termed cypherpunks, which are just advocates for privacy, that humans have the right to privacy online and in general. Okay, so these are people dedicated to basically always, I guess, fighting the state when the state comes and tries to, invade on privacy. These are the people fighting for, digital privacy, right? So they're the cypherpunk community. Satoshi Nakamoto was basically, he or the group or whoever it was studied and understood the last 40 years that was leading up to what Bitcoin did. So all he did was solve, I guess, a critical piece that all these predecessors didn't in the beginning, right? So you had all these before it, like some were called eCash, BitGold, whatever, there's a bunch of them. But they all failed ultimately for one reason, because there was a centralization aspect. So not to get too into like the history, but he studied the word of someone in the Bitcoin space named Dr. Adam Back, another cryptographer, who came up with the term the idea behind proof of work consensus mechanism, which was back in like the 90s or 2000s. Email spam is still a massive problem, right? So what he wanted to do was come up with a way for spammers, for like a protocol, so you couldn't just spam email, but you had to, I guess, do some sort of work before you would send an email. And we're keeping this super simple, right? So like, let's say scammers today can create a Python script or whatever and spam billions of emails. And he basically wanted to put in some sort of infrastructure so you couldn't do that. Let's just keep it simple. He applied that to now his, I guess, monetary system that he was working on, which is Bitcoin, for your digital currency. So you have Bitcoin, the network protocol, and then Bitcoin, the currency. It's two different things. Officially, like Bitcoin with a capital B is referring to the protocol. Bitcoin with a lowercase b is the currency.
Oh, okay.
He took Adam Back's proof of work consensus mechanism and applied it to Bitcoin. So what does that mean? To create Bitcoin, you had to go and you had to do work to create it. The way banks can't, they can create money without doing work. To create gold, you have to take this, kinetic power, man labor, go and mine it, think work. Now digital age. So gold was analog, physical. Now we're moving into the digital age. So what that means is there's still a physicality aspect of it. To create Bitcoin, you basically have to mine it into existence, but it's not really mining, right? And again, so let me know if you have any questions up to this point, because this is I'm trying to keep this super simple. Everything.
So you need servers and things like that to mine.
So all right. So to make it simple, Bitcoin started off where Satoshi actually mined, a good amount of Bitcoin on his laptop, which was a CPU, computer or processing unit. You could mine Bitcoin with the electricity powered that one laptop. Okay, because all you need to do is run the software. That what we talked about, right? The Bitcoin Core software. Anyone at that point, he was the first one to do it. He started mining Bitcoin. He sent out an email, his Bitcoin white paper, to a list of cypherpunks. These people, the privacy advocates. He sent out an email saying, "Hey, listen, guys, here's my white paper. Here's this Bitcoin thing. I think I solved one of the most vital problems in, cryptographic money, which is the proof of work, or what's in computer science called the Byzantine generals problem, which we're not even going to get into that for simplicity. Yeah. But he solved a major problem that everyone 40 years before him didn't. But Bitcoin didn't just come up overnight. It's 40 years of innovation. And this group, this person, individual, whoever, solved one piece of it. And then he sent out his paper to all these people in the community, in the cypherpunk community. Some people read it, some discarded it, and then the history goes, few select prominent names in the Bitcoin industry, there's something here. And they started to work on that. To speed this along, eventually it got, more and more people started joining the network. So what you need to understand is, for simplicity, Bitcoin, anyone can run the Bitcoin Core software. That's where the decentralization aspect. So when people say who runs Bitcoin, no one and everyone, because anyone with a couple $100 can buy the computer parts to put together to run a Bitcoin node, which is just basically they keep a copy of the Bitcoin ledger, which is all the transactions that happen on the network. So when you think of who runs Bitcoin, it's hundreds of thousands of nodes scattered across the planet. I could run a node here, here I could get the parts I need and just run the software, and my node validates all the transactions that go on, transactions of people sending Bitcoin. So now mining is different. So you have nodes, which anyone can do. That's why it's the most decentralized network, because the more people you get in to do this, the more powerful the animal becomes. And we're at the point now where, in terms of computing power, so Satoshi started on a laptop, then he needed a more power, to mine Bitcoin, you needed a more powerful laptop, a GPU, graphic processing unit, more powerful computer. Then it got, because you need electricity. That's the key. You need work. That's the work that you need. You need to go out and find cheap power to run the hashing algorithm that makes the Bitcoin. Again, super, super simple here. We're not getting too in the weeds. Then it gets to the point where you need to actually build specific computers. And so the mining aspect of Bitcoin is free market capitalism, because Bitcoin, if you are able to create, bring supply, Bitcoin supply to the market, you get paid, the network pays you the protocol pays the miner who expends the most power in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's designed to have every 4 years. So there will only ever be 21 million. So you have all these miners are basically competing with each other, expending energy, work. Again, remember, that's the key, expending work to actually create money and bring it, supply to the market. So at that point, now the Bitcoin, I guess, computing power is so strong, no government on earth can shut it down. It's beyond, that ship has sailed. And I know it's like, people, if you don't understand, like, like what I'm just telling
Is
you.
it like an open source? Is that what you're talking
Well, that's
about? Like that would be a comparable example, open source.
That's why when it seems confusing from the outside, what you have to understand is this basic software that people who understand computer science, anyone can, anyone can download it and run it. So any government can, download Bitcoin Core and try to create an attack on it. But here's the key. Here's the beauty of what Satoshi created. He made it, with his protocol, the rules, he made it where it was more, you're rewarded more if you just join the network than if you attack it. Well, what you're thinking right now, no, governments don't want competitors. They're going to attack it. So to put this simply, like really good example, think about if you had one giant castle and you're an army and there's $1 billion in that castle and you want to attack the castle and get the $1 billion. You have your army. It's one castle. You're going to give it everything you got and you're going to, eventually get in and steal the $1 billion, right? Think of Bitcoin as the incentive mechanism of, instead of one castle with $1 billion, think of 1 billion castles with $1 in each castle. And you have to now go with your army. Think of each castle as a fortress with an army. Again, imagination here, right?
But if you shut down the grid, because you said electricity powers this, then.
Yeah, well, but again, even we're at the point now where you would have to shut off every inch of power on planet Earth. At the same time, you would have to shut down the internet to even threaten Bitcoin. And here's the kicker.
I hope Klaus isn't listening to that.
Again, well, no, let him listen. Because here's what these fucks don't understand. You can run Bitcoin off the internet. Again, I can't get into like the technicals of it, but it can be done. There's something called mesh networks, which if these bastards want to do their little cyber attack, Bitcoin will survive because someone somewhere out there will be running Bitcoin signals off an empty can of soup. You know what I'm saying? I'm telling you, this stuff is possible. You can run. There's technology today that a lot of people don't understand, but like in the cryptographer, these are the guys that are men and women, because there are women cryptographers too. These are the people that are working night and day around the clock to be ready for these state, because the state, we're just getting started. You know what I'm saying? Like, people understand is that Bitcoin reached $1 trillion market cap in 12 years. It took, I want to say the next competitor was, I think maybe it was Amazon, took like 20 years to do that. Bitcoin did it in half the time. And roughly around those numbers. This thing it's an animal. I mean, it's not at $1 trillion now, but it just keeps, you can watch the network grow and it's growing exponentially because.
Don't you get taxed for owning Bitcoin?
If you sell it back into dollars, but we already discussed, like, if you're again, this is what Saylor understands when people say, oh, he's going to sell it all. When you understand that the US dollar is a melting ice cube, why would you take the scarcest asset on planet Earth and sell it back into crumbling trash? Well, people will say, oh, well, because you need to fund your living expenses. No, because we are now building an outside monetary system where people are going to lend and borrow against Bitcoin. Again, this is all being built alongside the crumbling fiat system. So like people think, again, fiat minded, you think people that think in dollars, the dollar is going to lose reserve status.
It takes dollars to get Bitcoin, right? You pay it dollars.
Well, it could be, I mean, the world's on a pseudo dollar standard still, but any country on earth can access Bitcoin with, their own currency. It's a global market.
Yeah, but like, how do you issue it?
Issue what?
Bitcoin.
So again, so back to the
we can't all become miners. That's not what's going to happen.
No. See, and that's another thing that people don't understand. They conflate thinking, or they compare.
See, my issue with Bitcoin is that it's so complicated. I'm like,
no, you don't.
It shouldn't be this hard, and you're cutting out a lot of stuff. So it's just like, it boggles my mind too
Yeah.
much.
So
Like
so
if it was truly efficient, it would be very easy.
let's simplify it even
And I
more.
know a lot of finance guys say the same thing. It's like, it just shouldn't be this hard. Like, why is it this hard? I
Right.
get that's not on you. That's
Let's
just
go
the
back.
way, the nature of it. But
So
you know,
let's go back to the year 2000 when the internet was start. I remember to use the internet, you had to like, if anyone picked up the landline house phone, you heard all this weird thing, like that weird scrambling sound. It was super slow, but no one understood we didn't care how the internet worked. How many people know how the internet works today? How many people understand the network layer, then the protocol layer, the transfer layer, and the application layer? No one understands how the internet works. They just,
yeah, that's different though.
no,
That's
no,
a
no.
service. It's not different in the comparison. But what I'm saying is, when you're wagering your life, because currency, whatever the currency may be, makes life go round. That's how you buy things. That's how you, build a life for yourself, I guess you could say, for lack of a better way of putting it. You don't do that with the internet. So I get what you're saying, but I just know now when I get on the internet, it just works. I don't really need to think, like, I pay a certain amount of money and I don't need to sit here and think like, well, how, I don't get, like, what, hello, what's in there? Like, I don't need to think about that, because my livelihood or my prosperity is not hinging on me knowing the inner workings of the internet.
Yeah.
Whereas with Bitcoin, it's currency. So it's like, I need to know, like, what is this? And it feels like every time there's some discussion around it, I'm just like, oh my God, like, it shouldn't be that. Like gold, you can explain gold, but I mean, and we set this up in the beginning. We had this, I am not a much of a, because of the complexity, I just don't really feel like Bitcoin's the answer, but I don't know a lot about Bitcoin. So my viewpoint is not an educated viewpoint, but that, and I kind of said that a little bit in the beginning on the first episode. So, I'm not trying to like put a damper on this, but it's just, it's very complex. And I feel like I'm coming from the novice point of view, which is the majority. So I do want to interject that. I'm not trying to burst the bubble here, but I do also want to like stay and say what's going on in my mind.
So let's go back to that. Okay. You saying it's too complicated. Okay, right? We just use the internet. Great point. Because Bitcoin right now, in terms of network adoption, or at the stage of its being, is internet 1997 or 1998. The internet wasn't like, again, I remember probably like around 2000 was the first time I ever even used the internet for like, it was like AOL Instant Messenger or something. It was the early beginnings. Like not everyone had a computer. Not everyone.
Yeah, but we don't have a lot of, the thing is, we don't really, if this is indeed the answer, we don't have the luxury of decades to roll out for this to become more like, oh, I get it. Like, no, we need to either figure this out or move on to something else. I guess.
No, there is nothing else. So, and we'll get to that too.
Okay, because we're
Bitcoin
probably looking at, maybe we'll try to make it like 15 minutes more. So
no, we're getting to, Bitcoin's growing at, Bitcoin is growing at twice the speed of internet adoption, which was the fastest adoption of any technology in all of human history. So we're already moving exponentially fast, because that's what happens with technology. And because we are short on time, forget everything about, you don't need to know forget it. No one needs to know any of how Bitcoin works. Here's what you need to know. You need to know how to download an app. I like Swan Bitcoin. It could be anyone. Download an app somewhere where you can take your fiat currency, your dollars, your pesos, yen, whatever it is. Download an app and exchange those for Bitcoin, and then be able to send that Bitcoin to another app on your phone, which represents a wallet. And then from that to a little flash drive called a hardware device, right? Three things.
So what if something happens to that hard drive?
All right. So here's the thing, right?
I mean, I'm sure there's a mechanism, but I just don't know what.
So these are the questions I want, because these are what people need, want to know. Bitcoin never leaves cyberspace. The only thing in the physical, I guess, the flash drive, whatever hardware device you have, simply gives you access to that Bitcoin in the form of, for simplicity, a password that's made up of, let's say, 12 or 24 words, random words. So when you buy one of these devices and you send your Bitcoin to it, it's not really sending it to it. Bitcoin is always in cyberspace. The only thing that device does when it generates the 12 words, which is your password, that password gives you access to your Bitcoin. That you can, now let's say I take that device, I chuck it in the ocean. Your Bitcoin is not gone as long as you have the 12 words. You can now take those 12 words, buy another device, and regenerate access to your Bitcoin, or via an app.
And that's your personal identification, that, and
Yeah.
it's not you. You should never put your name or anything on that.
Well,
right?
well, when you buy Bitcoin on an exchange, like let's say Coinbase, for example, you have to go through KYC, which is know your customer regulation. So the government's going to know you have. I mean, there are ways to get Bitcoin without KYC. We're at, again, Internet 97, early stages. We're not at the point where it's easy, but it is possible. But you got to be like savvy.
'Cause I'm thinking about that Canadian incident with the truck drivers. And
Yeah. So
they froze
yeah,
Bitcoin.
but let's
so-
keep it. Let's not even get to that yet. Let's get the most basic stuff. All right. So now you know all the only thing a person needs to know about Bitcoin: download an app, buy it, and then send it to either another app on your phone, which could be in the form of a wallet. It could be an it's called a hot wallet. So it's an app, and it's like a wallet on your phone. Think about your Apple Wallet, right? Or a physical device, which is, you want one that's I mean, there are better ones than others, but let's just say it's called a cold storage device, which means it's off the internet, which means no one can hack into it. And the only thing you need to know with either the phone wallet or the hardware wallet, is you got to protect those 12 or 24 words as if you were protecting your life savings.
Okay.
So that's the next step, would be, I guess, because remember, Bitcoin is the path to being your own bank. So like what we saw in Canada when fascist Castro Trudeau Jr. decided to overnight change the laws and make everyone a criminal. They shut down, they got GoFundMe, they shut down all these centralized, because they're companies with faces behind them. Bitcoin doesn't have a face, a CEO to go at. It's a network that's operated by everyone.
So
right?
how did they get
So
people's
what did they
information
do?
about
This
Bitcoin?
is why this is the big mistake they made, was certain individuals put themselves out there openly on social media saying that we're the ones raising Bitcoin and we have access to the wallets. You gave the state a target. And again, we're not at the point in Bitcoin where, because it's semi-anonymous, so it's like, it's not again, it's we're not at the point where you can just send money to anonymous wallets without like knowing who they are, that you can trust them. Because anyone could say, oh, I'm a trucker, send me Bitcoin, and then you could run all, you know what I'm saying? We're not at that level yet. It's not meant for that type of, what it did work was, we sent over $1 million. I sent money to the truckers. We sent over $1 million in Bitcoin like that. No bank was able to, no one could stop it. But the person who put their face out there, the fascist, government went to their house, put a gun to their head and said, you either get, that's how the state, but again, that's what happens when fascism, communism completely takes over a country. Canada is completely owned and controlled by, WEF, and that's a fascist, regime over there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're getting to that point here. If we don't wake up, but
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like Bitcoin can circumvent that, though, if it gets to
yet,
that point.
because again, there are things that exist right now, but we're not at the level where the education's out. Like, it's like, how do I explain it? It's like when email came out, no one had they're like, what the hell? No, I could send a letter over mail. But again, it gets better and it gets better and it gets better and it gets better, but it's happening so much faster. We're not looking.
What could
20
those
years.
truckers do with that Bitcoin?
So the key for that was, again, people were like, well, I can't spend, but you can spend Bitcoin, but that wasn't the point of it. There are companies that operate, they're partners with Visa. So what you could do is, if you have Bitcoin on a wallet, you could send it to these companies and get a prepaid Visa card. So let's say you have $100 in Bitcoin, or not, you could go on to one of these companies and exchange your $100 in Bitcoin for $100 in a Visa gift card. So if the truckers are out there protesting, parking, and they need access to money, on a phone app, you can, you can get a digital gift card and use it anywhere where Visa is accepted. Things
Okay,
like
but where's the anonymity of that when you're cashing it out?
what on the
Yeah, like if I'm Joe Schmo truck driver and I have a
point,
Bitcoin wallet,
you don't need to, you don't,
how am I don't I have to give my information over to pay with the Bitcoin to get the card?
no, because you're just swapping Bitcoin for money. That the government can't the government's not, I mean, they are capable.
Well, can't they just go to where you would cash that out and say,
No,
do you
no,
have
it's
this person on
over
your?
the internet. It's over the internet. You're on a website, so you're not going to a physical store.
No, I know, but I'm saying, don't you have to fill out, like when I buy a gift card?
Yeah, the government can't stop you from going on a website and using it.
But I mean, do you have to put in your personal information to get that?
To my knowledge, I don't think so. I
Okay.
think you just have to swap it. I could be wrong, because I never personally used. One of them is called Bit Refill. I'd have to look more into it. Again, even it's not like the government knows the names of all these hundreds of or however many truckers there were. It's not like, I mean, if you get Bitcoin, you can hop on and remember the whole point of this was to fund them while they were out in living in their trucks in protesting.
Yeah.
It wasn't to they're not living a normal, they need access to
No, I
cash.
know, but I just want to know what they could purchase. But I see you're not really buying with Bitcoin. You're just doing the exchange.
Yeah. Because GoFundMe was sending fiat or dollars to an account which would go to their bank account. What happened? Central point of attack. Government puts their boot on GoFundMe. They fold like a lawn chair. And they tried to steal the money. Disgraceful.
Yeah. I don't think they ever got their money back though.
I think they got so much backlash that they did refund everyone. At first, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna donate this to our cause," which is absolute BS. But so government, that was the first attack. The government couldn't stop. We had the $1 million in Bitcoin. They couldn't stop that. And then the problem was the hard part here was distributing the Bitcoin. So you had individuals literally handing out folders with instructions to all these truck drivers. Again, this is early stages. So now we had the trial run. We saw what went right, what went wrong. And now next time, because it's these are battles, right? Not everything's going to be won on the first shot. Now we look back and now we saw everything that went wrong. And now we know for the next, because again, there's going to be more. I don't like to say battle because I like to think of it as out innovate the pathetic state, but it's these are battles, right? Yeah. So
that's how you learn and optimize too.
Because this is what happened. The Canadian government sent a SWAT team to this dude's house basically, and at the point of a gun said, "Give us the Bitcoin." That is a problem right now. If they know who you are, you're a point of attack, and they will come and put a gun to your head, and they can't take, and here's something. I have a gold chain, right? Mm-hmm. You put a gun to my head, you can blow my brains out and take my gold chain. You have the gold. If I have 12 words in my head, you can blow my brains out, but you can't take my Bitcoin unless I give it to you. But if I don't know the 12 words, and there's ways to store Bitcoin called multi-signature, which I'm not even going to get into that. I now say, I can't give you the Bitcoin. You can murder me right now. I can't give it to you. It's the only bearer instrument on planet Earth that cannot be forcibly taken. Think about wars over the ancient years. Over the years, there's always kinetic warfare was to grab land, to grab gold, to grab whatever it was. This is the first monetary system in history which actually incentivizes war, because you can't physically get anything by mounting an attack, if you know what I mean. So right now the government can raid your house, put a gun to your face and say, "Give us your Bitcoin." If you don't make yourself a point of, I mean, they can jail you and things, but they can't take it. Mm-hmm. So That's one thing people need to understand, is the only asset on planet Earth that
What
cannot
about
be.
if they just stopped all institutions from recognizing Bitcoin of having any value?
And that's the cult's battle right now, because
Yeah.
remember, while they control everything, they don't control everything. Let me explain that. You have to understand, like, this cult operates in secrecy through compartmentalization. They infiltrate through policy and try to put. So right now, there's absolutely policy to close. They call that closing the gates from. And again, it's all the financial system's energy. They need all of our energy in their system. How do they do that? You have cold control to his fingertips puppet Gary Gensler at the SEC, absolutely denying ways for the average person to get in exposure to Bitcoin through bullshit financial products, which I don't think you should own Bitcoin like that anyway. It's better to just buy it and own it yourself. But let's say for the average person to get exposure to it through an ETF in their retirement account for 401k, like the traditional finance way, which I don't think it's great, but again, they do what he keeps denying ETF applications from all these because the financial firms want it. They see dollar signs, right? And even if they're cold controlled, like 99% of people don't know it. They're just normal working people. It's not like they're in on it. That's what.
Well, why do they see dollar signs? I don't understand.
Because because if they, let's say they buy Bitcoin and they start selling it, now they're selling it to people and throwing a markup on it. It's a business.
Isn't there a finite? I thought it was controlled by the people. It wasn't centralized.
It is controlled by. It is. We had access. The person who did the work to understand Bitcoin got the first dibs. So these are all the crazy cypherpunk Bitcoin laser-eyed, psychopaths that the mainstream media calls us, because we understood the scam that is a financial system, and we started getting out of it by loading, buying up as much as we can. But now the financial institutions, they are coming, but they're actually kept out because the cult controls government policies and all this stuff that remember, these big financial institutions, while ultimately controlled, you got to remember compartmentalization. The average person that works at these firms, they don't know that there's a manipulator. They're just normal people. Like, they see business, they see opportunity. Like, they want to sink their billions of dollars into Bitcoin and then sell it now as financial products like Bitcoin ETF for a fee. Everything is fees, right? That's Wall Street's mentality.
Yeah, but that just seems then that would just be like the regular financial system at the end of the day. Well, that's exactly. Why I don't understand why that would even be permissible.
No, I want nothing to do with that, but that's coming regardless. Like, we can't say, oh no, Fidelity, you can't get into Bitcoin. They're coming regardless. But here's the key. You don't need to do that. You, Corinne, can go you can get Bitcoin yourself and hold it. And this is the key that everyone needs to understand. You don't need to understand how Bitcoin works. You don't need to. What you need to do, if you just buy it and hold it, and maybe listen to these podcasts and understand the predicament we're in, all you have to do is buy and hold. Mm-hmm. And everything else does its work for you, because everyone else starts to figure out that they're sitting on a crumbling balance sheet of cash and credit. When you start to let's say you're a multimillionaire, you created value, you created businesses, you created your little empire, and now it's through government destruction of the money, everything you worked for is now melting. Or you're the working person with your life savings hidden under your bed, your money's evaporating in purchasing power. When more and more, that's why education is vital. The more and more people start to understand this, they're going to start leaving the fiat system, sending their energy out of the cult's fiat system into the Bitcoin system. It's like it's getting our energy out of their system to a new system. So it doesn't matter if you're Fidelity with billions of dollars coming to Bitcoin, or the single mom with 3 kids working 3 jobs to put food on the table. Anybody can buy Bitcoin. The problem is, if you don't understand, and this is why this stuff was so important. If you don't know the problem, which, believe me, as much as we think people know the problem, they don't. They see their 401k. Oh, I have a couple $100,000 in there. I'm fine because everything's been fine, and we're America. These people don't understand it's a sinking ship. You know what I'm saying? That's the problem. No one understands the problem. So if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to understand the need for Bitcoin. And what I try to do, it's like,
well, I mean, we're running definitely low on time here. We're pretty much out of time. But my thing is, you can't jump clueless from one ship into another ship without the knowledge of knowing 100% that that's, or not 100%, but feeling mostly confident that that is then the right solution. So that's where, my opinion, it's like say you're on a sinking ship and there's a life raft there. It's like, okay, but we need you to know like all this stuff before you get on this thing, and you're like sinking. It's just, for myself, I cannot speak for the audience, I just wish it was a little bit more clear cut, and I just don't feel that it is. It's just very complex.
I didn't, because again, we should have did 3 episodes, because if I would have gone into deep what I had here, which I had to rush through, we would understand. But that, unless people understand, again, for example, like I was going to go into, Robert Kiyosaki talks about ERISA, 1974. They started herding everyone into defined contribution plans. 401. I was going to go deep into that. How they have everyone like cattle into these.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's like, everybody doesn't always, like most people nowadays, you're lucky if you get their 5-minute attention span. So that's the tricky part. And I'm not happy about that, but it just is what it is.
Again, you can't look at it like that. You have to look at like, this is the world that's coming. If these people get their way, I don't care if I wake up one freaking person. This information is vital for every person on the planet to understand.
Hey guys, so as you can see, things got a little heated. I think that's the best kind of discussion to have. I did stop the video or the tape, shall I say, for those listening on audio, because I realized this was also taking us down another rabbit hole. As you can see, there's a lot to unpack about Bitcoin, the financial system. We clearly don't always agree on that, which is great. I mean, that's what these kind of discussions are for. This kind of discourse helps people learn and make educated decisions for themselves. So certainly not complaining about that. It's funny because part of me wanted to stop or edit, and I decided not to, because I think it's important that, the conversation unfurl as it needed to. We are going to have a part 3. That was unexpected, but we are going to have a part 3. So stay tuned for that. If there's questions you have or you want addressed before the part 3, that's not going to be scheduled probably till at least another week out. Let us know in the comments. If you're listening to this on video, we would love to have that information so I can try to vet some of those questions to Ed. The more interactive, the better. Be sure to hit the like button if you like what you heard. Share it with your friends. We're trying to grow the channel. We want to get this information out. It's so very important. So if you can help out with that, that would be great. The more likes, the more followers, subscribers we get, the better guests we get. It's all a numbers game, unfortunately, but I appreciate everything. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for part 3. Also have another great guest returning. I won't say yet who, but exciting stuff. Anyway, take care, guys. Thanks for everything. Bye.